Okay, Boker Tov. Today's daf is Memhei. We pick up on the bottom of Memdalad Amet Bet. We are in the middle of a whole discussion about being a testifying on land or on anything, but that through your testimony you might stand to have some type of a gain, and that makes you invalid to testify. And trying to figure out what are those circumstances. So we pick up 4 lines from the bottom. Gufa. Amar Ravina Bar Shmuel Bishmei Shmuel. The Rabbi, the son of Shmuel, says in the name of Shmuel, his father. Hamocher Sadeh Sadeh Lechadeh Shmuel Bechrayas. Somebody Reuven sells to Shimon a field, and he does not give him insurance. He does not tell Shimon that he will reimburse him if the field gets taken, because if he gives him insurance, it's patently obvious that he can't testify on behalf of Shimon. That's protecting him from having to pay out the insurance. But you might think if you didn't give Shimon insurance, and if the field is taken from Shimon, he will not have to pay out. So you might think that he would be able to testify that the field was legitimately Shimon's. Nevertheless, he says, "A may lo love." You cannot testify to keep the field in Shimon's possession. Why? This is what we've discussed now. The third time this is being quoted, because Reuven still benefits from the fact that it's in Shimon's possession rather than it had always belonged to Yehuda. So when Reuven's creditors come to Reuven and Reuven doesn't have the money to pay, he will be able to collect from Shimon because it went through Reuven to Shimon. And if it proves that it's not Shimon's because it was never Shimon's, it was never Reuven's, it was always somebody else's, then the creditor won't be paid. So he has that indirect benefit that it could be collected by creditors. Again, it seems like we do not ask a case-by-case scenario of like, what if in this particular circumstances there aren't creditors? Although, if Reuven is very wealthy and we're not concerned about that. Although, again, I'll remind you, yesterday we had like an ukimta about some type of cases, like, if you bought something and sold it right away, or if you never had land or whatever, in that case, you remember some of those answers we had yesterday, in that case, you would be allowed to testify. So it actually sounds a little bit from yesterday that this isn't categorical, that if we can actually prove that somebody is free of interests, it might be okay. All right, but as a rule, we're not going to let somebody testify because we assume that there will be some gain. Now, Heichidami, what's the case? Says the Gemara, top of Memhem Aleph. So here the Gemara does exactly that. It says, let's look and decide, not just is there or isn't there creditors, because that's like the hardest thing to decide. Who knows if there's some creditor somewhere that we don't know about, and how do you prove a negative? But let's see, based on the circumstances, if there really is some gain. It may be, and the easiest thing to test for is, like I said before, is Reuven wealthy? Is there other stuff the creditor could collect from? And if there's plenty of other stuff that the creditor could collect from, then Reuven does not really gain anything. So if he has more land, the creditor will come straight to Reuven. So it doesn't matter that Shimon has land; Reuven has land. So either Leisley Arachrisi, and if he has no other land. So now I just want to pause for a moment about that. Why do you think it said if Reuven has land, then he doesn't benefit? Why didn't it say if Reuven has $10 million in the bank, then he doesn't benefit? Yes?
Because it's easier to get access to something that is land.
It's easier to get access. Not only is it easier to get access,
The liens are only
meaning it can't get lost. It can't disappear.
You can't
gamble. You can gamble away your $10 million. You can invest it and lose the stock and whatever. What's the worst that could happen to land? You could sell it. Well, if you sold it, then he could still collect from the land. So if there's other land, forget other money. Presumably doesn't matter. There's still going to be a benefit because fortunes go up and fortunes go down. But if there's other land for the creditor to collect from, then even if you didn't have this land available for the creditor, he will always have other land. Now you might say, maybe the other land isn't as good, maybe whatever. But the point is, well, who cares? We're talking about whether you benefit. So it might be worse off for the creditor to get from this land than the other land, but at least you're going to get your debt paid off. Okay, so if Reuven has other land, then we know that the creditor will regardless get his debt paid off, and therefore he would be able to testify. Now, in theory, I could actually make still a distinction, which is I have $1,000 debt on me. I sell this land to Eli. And I want to but I have 3 other plots of land. I want to testify that it's either say, well, I'm not going to gain anything because the creditor could always get for the other 3 plots of land. But you know what I'm going to gain from? Now I want to borrow $10,000 from you. If I now have 3 unencumbered plots of land, you're going to lend me the money. But if I actually have only 2 unencumbered plots of land, because that land from Eli was taken away, and now one of these lands is another person has first dibs on, so I have less unencumbered property, right? That maybe you'll be more hesitant to lend me money. People sort of see that, right?
Yeah.
Because so the amount of total assets, maybe the particular creditors you have will get paid up right away, okay? But it doesn't mean that you're not going to gain from the fact that you have more assets. Or I can give you another case. Let's say I have I have number of creditors equal to my full debt. I have 2 creditors. I owe each of them $2,000. Each of them $1,000. Each plot of land is worth $1,000. One plot of land is sold to Eli, and one plot of land I still have. So if we say, oh, I'm allowed to testify because creditor number 1 can still collect from this plot of land, but no, creditor number 2 is then going to be out, right? So if I am shrinking the available assets I have for creditors to collect from, there actually is still some loss.
Why can't creditor number 2 take it from the look?
No, that's why he can if I testify that it belonged to Eli. But if it turns out it never belonged to him, and I'm allowed to testify it belongs to him, oh, maybe, right? You got it?
I thought I did.
All right, maybe I'm making things too complicated. Here's Reuben. He sells to Shimon 1 plot of land.
Somebody looked like yesterday.
I know. Okay, he sells to Shimon 1 plot of land. Okay, that's worth $1,000. Okay, and he has a creditor, we'll call him Linzer. Okay, who lent him $1,000. Okay, and I have another plot of land also worth $1,000. So we're going to say I can testify that land is Shimon's because I don't gain that. The reason I shouldn't be able to testify is I gained that Levi could collect from it. But I'm not going to gain in this case because Levi can always just collect from this plot of land. Okay, but what about a scenario where there's 2 creditors? Okay, right? So it might be that this creditor has this plot of, this creditor can collect from this, but this guy will be out. By keeping this land in the hand of Shimon, I'm allowing both of them to
But the key is that you sold it to Shimon b'li achrayus. If you sold it to Shimon with achrayus,
no, b'li achrayus means I don't have to reimburse Shimon if it gets taken away.
understand.
Yeah, okay.
But if you sold it to Shimon with achrayus, then all of your land ends up being encumbered anyway.
Right, so I certainly can't testify if I sold it to him with achrayus. I'm just saying that even without achrayus, okay, it's not so clear just because I have other land, that means that this doesn't benefit me. This does benefit me. We don't know how much my outstanding debts are. Until we don't know how much my outstanding debts are, having one more piece of land to collect from, even if we know I have plenty, can still help me. But okay, the Gemara is willing to say that. Let's read it again. Maybe we're not going to just worry that far because we don't even know if there are creditors. So since it's all hypothetical, we're not going to go that far.
Listen, so you think if we actually knew, then it might change?
No, but it means a whole, I don't know. Anyway, maybe we'd be more concerned because we already know there are X number of creditors. I don't know. So if he has, I'll just read this, plenty of land, we're not going to be concerned that this one plot he really stands to gain. There's plenty of other land available for the creditors. Now, so then he should be able to testify. If he doesn't have any other land, so let's say the case that we assume he doesn't have any land, and we're afraid that he's going to benefit because he'll allow Levi to get paid up. So the Gemara says, what benefit is that? Okay, why is that no benefit? Because if he doesn't have any other land, then he's not going to lose any other money from Reuven because Reuven isn't going to take a meaning here. You have to say land doesn't just mean land; it means any assets. If he has no other assets, okay, then whether Reuven can collect from this or not collect from this, whether Levi can collect from this or not collect from this, Levi is not collecting from Reuven because Reuven has no other assets. So what benefit does Reuven have? Now there's an obvious answer.
Well, at some point he might get something.
Well, okay, first of all, he might eventually get assets, and Levi can always collect from the current assets that Reuven has. Okay, so that's the most obvious, right? Is that even if he has no assets now, you'd rather not have an outstanding debt. Yeah. Even if Levi isn't collecting the debt now because you have no assets, if he would have collected this, you'd be done. Now that he's not collecting the debt because this land is not Shimon's, your debt remains. And you don't want to still be in a state of being indebted. It's kind of obvious. And you might get money later on. So Tosfos raises that point. It's bizarre that the Gemara did not raise that point. That's the most obvious thing. The other thing is interesting is that the Gemara says if he has no other land, where can Levi collect from? You could say he has no other land, but he has available assets. Anyway, so, chattel. But that's the Gemara's question. So let's see the Gemara's answer. Well, let's read it. Okay. So now if Reuven has no other land, so, and again, maybe that we're going to assume that also means no assets.
Did Tosfos give an answer to it?
No, we'll read the Tosfos inside. What difference does it make? Levi isn't going to collect anyway. Okay, assuming it means he not only has no other land, but he has no other assets, and assuming we're going to ignore the fact that he might get assets later on. So if he's never going to pay the debt, what difference does it make that he pays the debt or doesn't pay the debt? He's never going to. Levi's never going to collect. He's never going to take any money out of his own pocket. So the Gemara says no. He doesn't have other land. The Amar lo nichali lo nichal lehave lo veroshav lo yishalem. I don't want to be the type of person that borrows money and never pays it back. So even if the reality is I will never pay up that debt, right? I don't want that to be, who I am, somebody who never pays the debts. I want my creditors to be paid off. You really understand that, somebody borrowed money, $10,000 like 20 years ago. They were having a hard time, and they're still feeling guilty because they have, the person who lent them the money was a friend. He says, don't worry about it. You don't have to pay it, whatever. And, people still say, no, I don't want to be indebted. I don't want to have I want to pay off that debt even after the person is basically said to forget about it. So here the point is, of course, even if it's true that Levi will never be able to collect any money from Reuven gains because he's not in a position of never having paid Levi. Now, the other interesting thing about that is that's a type of, on the one hand, it's a very understandable benefit. That's really important to people. They should not be welchers. Is that a non-PC term? Anyway, that they should not, they should not pay off their debts. Okay, but it's not a concrete monetary benefit, right? Maybe it is. Maybe it means that he won't be able to borrow money from other people. But I'm just raising the question of what type of benefit invalidates you for a testimony. Is the fact that I got this exactly. So it's not something that has a clear dollar value. Again, maybe it does because now my credit rating has gone down, right? So if you think about it that way, maintaining credit rating has a clear dollar value. But that's another interesting question. Let's look at Tosfos. Well, I just want to read Tosfos. My nafka mina. Tosfos says, Tema, the nafka mina sheiftu imitasher, right? Of course, there's a nafka mina. That if he gets paid off now, then if he gets more assets, then if Reuven gets more assets later, he'll never have to pay Levi. Since there's no immediate benefit, okay? So that's an interesting question too. How do you measure benefit? Right now, I'm not benefiting because he's not taking any money away from me, but this will benefit me in the future, okay? So there's interesting questions here about how to measure type of benefit that validates me for a witness. Wait, David has had a question.
Liens are only on property, only on land, right?
Right. But if it's under if I own it, you can collect from anything. It's only when the credit borrower sells that the creditors can only follow the land. But if they can take anything.
When we were discussing before, he might have cash as well.
That's what I said. That's what I said. Another nafkamina is that Reuven doesn't have other land, but he has cash. I don't know why the Gemara didn't say that either.
No, but I mean, but we're saying if he sold. Oh, he has cash.
If Reuven has cash,
that's still come to him.
Yeah, exactly.
Levi.
Exactly. Levi could still come to him. Oh, but I guess the reason the Gemara isn't saying that. Oh no, now it occurs to me. The reason the Gemara isn't saying that is if he had cash, Levi wouldn't be going to Shimon anyway, because you first have to try to collect from the first one. You don't go to Shimon if Reuven had no money. So actually, that's why the Gemara isn't giving that as an afkamina, because if he had cash, it would never have been collected from Shimon to begin with. Dov, you got a question? Okay. All right. So here we have this case. You can't testify for Shimon because you're going to benefit. What's the benefit? One benefit we said is that you might have money later. But Tosa says, well, but that's in the future. And I say, you think Dov was pointing out under his breath. It's in the future and it's not even certain. So that's not enough of a benefit. But the immediate benefit is you don't have an outstanding loan against you. Even if you're not going to now or later spend any money, you benefit from the fact that it's not an outstanding loan against you.
So we correctly assume that all sales of land are encumbered unless you specifically specify that they're not.
They're encumbered in the sense that anybody who buys land has to assume that if the person he's buying it from took out a loan, that there are liens on this land.
Right.
So that's what you mean. The answer is yes. Well, you can't specify with the buyer. It's too late. You have to have specified with the guy you were borrowing money from. If I borrow money from you, and then I sell my land to David, I can say, David, I'm selling you this piece of land, but I'm removing those liens from it. Yeah. If I wanted to keep you off of that land, I would have to specify that in my document.
As part of the
loan.
Yeah, loan.
Isn't that a guarantee?
Yeah.
What? Saying I'm removing somebody's liens.
Right. Thank you. The way I could protect David, and I don't have the power to remove your liens, but the way I could protect David is I can insure it. And I could say, if that land gets taken because of Dov's liens, I'm going to reimburse it. Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you, David. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. Okay. Machri's Rava, so Rava announced, the Itema Rav Papa, and some say Rav Papa announced, the Salkin La'ela v'denachtin l'tata, those that go up and come down, sounds like Yaakov's ladder, those that go to Eretz Yisrael.
And what was the so?
Did I skip a line?
Yeah.
Oh, Lov Rosh Sof Gabe Idach Nami Lov Rosh V'lo Yishalim. Thank you very much. That's what's called Shmat Al Yidei Hadomot. Okay, at the end of the day,
If you're writing.
it's true. Okay, if at the end of the day, okay, so I benefit. What do I benefit? That Levi is going to get paid up. But the Gemara says, but I don't benefit because in that case, Shimon, I still feel bad for Shimon. I took his money and he doesn't wind up with a land, so I'm going to feel what I'm just exchanging one. You know, if this land wasn't Shimon's ever, then then Levi would have something against me. Now that Levi is taking it, right, and you're saying that's going to benefit, Levi won't have something against me, but Shimon will have something against me. Because now Shimon's land will have been taken due to my debts, and now I won't have money to pay up Shimon. So the Gemara gives the obvious answer to that. It says, no, the Amar lahachis v'inu l'chashalo bechrayis. No, because I'll tell to Shimon, why do you think I didn't insure the plot of land? Okay, you should have known. You were taking your own risk. Meaning here, Shimon might be upset that the land was taken, but I could say, you knew the risks going in. Okay, so the fact that I genuinely borrowed $1,000 from Levi and I'm not reimbursing him, that's a real problem. I'm not paying off my debts. Here, there was no debt when Levi takes the land. Shimon is angry. I can say to Shimon, you knew the risks going in. I was not insuring it. You knew there might be creditors. Don't come complaining to me. And even if he complains, I'm not the type of person that borrows money and doesn't pay it back. It's a very different type of a thing, my relationship to Levi.
I'm sorry, so you're the type of person that sells things that aren't yours?
No, it was mine.
No.
It's just that it's now being taken
No,
as a
I mean,
debt.
sorry, you're the type of person that sells things when you know that, this might be.
Yeah, I'm a type of person that knows how to play the risks in business.
He needed fast cash.
Everything is on the table. You know that there are always risks with liens on land. I'm selling to without insurance. I'm a smart businessman.
Shimon got
Okay.
the land for a
So you
good
can
price.
say the same thing in the other case.
What?
Smart businessman getting out of the loan. So
that we don't say. That's immoral to borrow money and not pay it up. Okay.
I don't know. I mean,
All right, I'm not debating. I am not debating this. We're moving on. Okay. So the Gemara says like this: Machri's Rava v'Itema Rav Papa. So Rav announced and something Rav Papa announced. Tisalkin ve'elav v'denatin l'tata. Those that go up and come down. Hi by Yisrael to all those that come from Eretz Yisrael to Bava and vice versa. Interesting what that context is. Anyway, but maybe because we'll see. Maybe this is a type of a thing that had more relevance in one geographic community than in another, or maybe to say that it's relevant regardless of the different governments. We'll see, because this has to do with non-Jews. So maybe he wants to make it clear that regardless of whether you're living under the Persians or whether you're living under the Romans, this is going to be a relevant halacha. Okay. Ha'ibar Yisrael does something like Chamra Yisrael. A Jew that sells Chamra here means actually a donkey. Often it means wine, but from context we're going to see it clearly means a donkey. Okay. Reuven sells a donkey to Shimon. Chavrei, the Ka'asi Akum, I'm sure the original gears was like Goy or Nochri, Ka'asi Nochri probably, the Anisley, and the Goy comes now, the non-Jew comes and seizes this donkey from Shimon and says, this donkey was always mine. So it's similar to like the Yehuda coming and saying this land is always mine, but now it's a non-Jew. And the question here is, how much do we have to assume that because they're the people in power, that they're going to be able to to take something without it being justified. Now, there are two scenarios. One scenario is they take it because they have a winning claim in their secular court of law, which for us would not be a winning claim because we're playing by different rules, right? So we would sort of say, no, and they might say, no, if you can prove that you owned it a week ago, then we'll assume it's still yours today, right? It just might be different rules. From our perspective, you're stealing it. It's mine, and the proof is that I'm holding on to it. From your laws, you're bringing evidence that it is yours. So that's one scenario. Another scenario is they just take it not within the context of their laws. They just take it because they're in power and they can just take things that they want to. Okay. So one or two of those are the possible scenarios. So now what's Reuven's responsibility to Shimon after Shimon's donkey was taken? Okay. So, Dinahu, the halacha is the mafzi le'mine. That Reuven now has a responsibility to try to, the Rashbam says the word mafti means like redeem it. He has a responsibility to try to retrieve the donkey for Shimon. Now, that's very interesting. First of all, how much is that responsibility? So, so the Rashbam says, well, now he needs to try to bring evidence in the non-Jewish court of law or whatever it is to try to help out and defend Shimon. Okay, so it makes it a different type of a parallel. Here I sold it to Shimon, and can I be a witness or not? Am I going to benefit or not benefit, etc. Here, it's sort of like, not only can I be a witness, I must come to Shimon's defense. Not because Shimon will have any, we'll see, whether he will or won't have any complaint against me and so on, right? It's not because there's no longer a question, first of all, about me being a kosher witness and do I have a vested interest. A, maybe because it's a non-Jewish court of law, and B, maybe because it's clear I don't have a vested interest. It's metaltalin, there are no liens, there are no achrayas. Okay, so fine. That allows me, let's say, to testify. But more important than allowing me to testify, here I have a moral, it even uses the word dina, which sounds like more legal obligation to come and try to protect Shimon. That's the way the Rashbam explains it. Rambam actually says I have to reimburse Shimon. Now that's a little crazy. Why is this so much my responsibility? I was taken from Shimon.
How do you explain Mafsili Minanin?
Redeem it. The question is, how do you redeem it? Redeem it through trying to bring witnesses and evidence and trying to help out Shimon in court, or redeem it by buying it back? Not paying, not compensated. I have to try to buy it back for Shimon. Okay? So now the Gemara is going to clarify where my responsibility comes to buy it back from Shimon.
So this is a way that you can potentially also take them to court or something like that and get it back? When the Mafsili
right.
They'll listen to you in their courts if there's a
way. Depending on which version you have, right? If it's a case of courts, maybe it's still within their courts, I can win it back. If it's maybe the non-Jew is acting just totally through his, force, then maybe I can buy it back or whatever. Okay, but one way or another, I have to come and try to help out Shimon. And so the Gemara says, now what's the situation? V'lo amrin elishenu makir bashi bat chomoro. That's what phrase we had yesterday. Now that's only true if if Shimon says, I don't know, if Shimon says to Reuven, I don't know, maybe it really did belong to the non-Jew. The non-Jew is claiming it's his. Again, whether he's claiming it because of Dina de Malchusa, whether he's claiming it because who's going to disagree with, the powerful, authorities, okay, but he's claiming it's his. Maybe it really is his, and therefore maybe you sold me something you didn't own. So therefore, since there is that possibility out there that maybe he actually sold him something that he did that wasn't genuinely his, Reuven has to come and try to help him out. Okay?
Why is it grammatically feminine?
Reuven is the seller. Eino makibah, because it's a donkey. He doesn't he does not know that the donkey genuinely is Shimon's. Is the daughter of, why is it the daughter, not the son? I guess because it's all in the feminine. Okay? Anyway, but he doesn't know that this donkey was born to Shimon. Shimon got the donkey. Yeah. I know that looks like horns. Anyway, my animals have, or maybe the little devil with an animal body. Anyway, okay. So anyway, okay. So the non-Jew here. What do we call the non-Jew? I think we'll call that. No, I know, but I decided that was being offensive.
Call him Marduk.
Okay, Marduk. Right, of Mordechai. Okay, there you go. Anyway, he comes and he says, that's mine. So now if Shimon knows that he's lying, and he says, I know this donkey was born to your donkey, I know I saw it in its stable or whatever, then Shimon knows that the non-Jew is just using force or using Dina de Malchusa, but he knows that legally it's mine, so I have no responsibility to him, because he knows that it's all because he got caught up in that system of law, he got up with those powers, it has nothing to do with me. But if Marduk is saying it was always his, and Shimon says, I don't know, for all I know, Marduk is telling the truth, maybe you sold me something you don't own, then I have to come to Shimon's defense. Now the question is that I have to try to help him out, we understand, right? That I should be obligated to like the Rambam, to buy it back. I'm like, maybe Marduk is telling the truth, but maybe he isn't. Right? Why should all of a sudden that create that level of, what's the level of obligation is an important question. Yes, Jenna.
How far back would you go? Like, what if Reuven says, oh, but I bought it from so-and-so, and that was a legitimate sale.
All right, that's an interesting point. So then how much does the people up the line have to come and defend and so on?
Right.
Yeah, and the irony here also is that if there is some moral or legal obligation to help him out, so what about in the case where it was land, right? Because we're saying all these cases where if it's land and Yehuda comes and claims it was always mine, Reuven is not allowed to testify because he indirectly benefits. So that technical problem of not being allowed to testify overrides any moral obligation Reuven might have to try to help out Shimon. right? Whereas here, when you don't have that and you are allowed, then the moral obligation kicks in. So it's interesting to line this up opposite the other one. Yes.
I'm just trying to understand where you get from the word bonus eliminating. It sounds like he just sees it by force and didn't say it was.
Right. So let's see where the Gemara
How do
says.
you know it doesn't mean just like,
I did. I gave you both possibilities. Let's see where the Gemara goes. Okay. So the Gemara says like this. So that's only if Shimon says, I don't know that this really is your donkey, Ruvain. If he really knows it's Ruvain's donkey and it uses his paskamor, like I saw it being born to one of your donkeys in your stable. Okay, so Shibas Chomoro. Then Ruvain has no responsibility to help him out. And here it gets to the issue. And we're only talking that Marduk took the donkey, but let Shimon keep the saddle. Because if you're taking the donkey and let Shimon keeping the saddle, it shows that you're actually making a genuine claim, or what you believe to be a genuine claim. You're not just taking because you have power. If you're taking because you have power, you're going to take it with the saddle. You can take the whole thing. But clearly it's Shimon's saddle. There's no debate. Right? The question is whose donkey it is. Nobody questions that it was Shimon's saddle. So if he's going to take the donkey with the saddle, then he's just using force, and then Reuven has no responsibility. But if he takes the donkey and leaves the saddle behind, right, then, maybe it really is Marduk's, and then Reuven has responsibility.
Why should he? I don't really. It's
Like
something
Nico.
very fundamental I don't get. I know if the Akum takes the Chamor without the saddle,
Right,
so it's quite believable that he really thinks that it's his.
right.
Why should there be an obligation to help the other Jew? I don't understand.
No, there is. If he takes it without the saddle. He took it without the saddle. So he's not just using force. He genuinely believes
Right.
it's his. And
So
let's
why
even
do I-
assume, and Tosos, by the way, assumes that also might mean, let's say, he wins it in Dina de Malchusa, right? So he genuinely believes. So you're saying, so why does that create my responsibility to him?
Yeah.
Because since there's a circumstantial evidence, now we raise the real genuine possibility that it might have belonged to Marduk and it might have been illegitimately mine, right? So then, given that if I, Reuven, know that it was mine, and I know that Marduk is lying, why do I have meaning from Shimon? Let's put it this way. From Shimon's perspective, you understand why Reuven has a responsibility. You sold me something and now it looks like you never owned it. Okay, from Reuven's perspective, if Reuven knows that he always did legitimately own it, he should have no moral responsibility because I know Marduk is lying. Okay, but given that situation, we're going to require Reuven to do what he can because Reuven could always have stolen it and claim that he knows that it's not stolen. So since from Shimon's perspective, that genuine possibility exists, right, we're going to require Reuven. But I hear your point. Maybe that's why it's din rather than moral. If it was moral, then I shouldn't have to do anything if I know that Marduk is lying.
And if it was a
But if it's a din, given that there is this possibility, we're going to demand that Reuven do what he can, then because that's dealing with the cases when we're not going to know what the story
And
is.
if it wasn't Marduk, but like Mordechai, then
That gets back to all the questions of if I would kasher eight or not. And then we're not going to assume, then it's all going to go by halacha. Here the whole point is that he took it in a way in halacha, so that's what creates it. Since by halacha we know Shimon owns it, so that's why now that creates a sort of sense of how do we respond to it when another system came in.
Do people ever buy or sell movable property without guarantees?
Unlikely, but I mean it's possible. Let's not worry. We're not dealing with that case. Okay, so the Lord says like if Marduk took both the donkey and the saddle, then clearly it's just by using force, and there would not be an obligation. Member says, even if there are none of these things, meaning even if there's all these things that indicate none of the problems, all these things that indicate that it might genuinely be Marduk's. Shimon doesn't know that it was born to Reuven. He took the donkey and he didn't take the saddle. All those things that we're saying, so Taka, maybe now it really is Marduk's. That creates an obligation on Reuven to try to help Shimon out. He says, no, I'm never going to believe any claim of the non-Jews it could be legitimate. My time, why? My time, maybe the stam of the Kochavim, honestly, because they know, because it's known that normal, idolaters, even I will say idolaters, even though the original gives, I'm sure it's nothing, normal Gentiles are, use forces to seize things that are not theirs.
Extortion.
What? Extortion. Amar, Asher PM Diber Shav Yiminam Yamin Sheker. Okay, so this is obviously one of those really difficult Gemaras because you understand, you understand historically why, there was very negative stereotypes of non-Jews. I mean, when there was particularly under the Roman government, and by the way, this might be why we emphasize that it was said both to the Jews who are going to Eretz Yisrael and the Jews who are coming to Bavel, because maybe the point is, even though the Roman government was a much more hostile one, and, in terms of the Jews, and certainly for the period, the whole, Adrianic persecutions and so on, and Chazal viewed like the tax collecting of the Romans as illegitimate. In Bavel, it was a much more friendly government. They viewed the tax collecting. The whole principle of Dina de Malchus Dina is said only in the Bava. It's not said in the Yerushalmi. It's very clear that they viewed the government as much more illegitimate, the government of the Romans and the government of the Persians. Okay, so given that, but nevertheless, since still, obviously, given the historical reality of the Jews' experience in lands of the non-Jews and so on, you can understand why it creates this perspective, this, about they're all violent and thieves and all of that type of stuff, becomes the stereotype. Okay, but what I think particularly, so you can understand where that comes and, why, and that's very relevant in a lot of halachot that have these questions of can we trust non-Jewish doctors, can we trust this, can we trust that, to appreciate some time of the historical setting in which some of these statements were said, and, some poskim actually do that and say now we're dealing with a different reality and we have to assess things, and we have to assess things differently. The issue with doctors, for example, comes up about a doctor saying somebody has to eat on Yom Kippur, because there the question isn't can we trust non-Jewish doctors, period, but can we trust them if they don't understand the importance of this question of am I allowed to fast or not, right? So that's like a different type of a framing. But nevertheless, okay, so in general, like you see statements like this, and we can somehow put them in a type of a historical context, and poskim have done that and have said that nowadays things could be different. At least some poskim have done that. I think what's troubling here is that you just got through a Gemara that actually was acknowledging that they're not all the same, and was actually acknowledging that there are some cases that are legitimate and some are not, and particularly one that's sourced in Bavel, where the government was more friendly. So like after all of that Terah Ameimar, and he's the voice that ends the sugya, saying, I don't care about I don't care about any of this evidence. I don't want to make distinctions. I just view them all in the exact same way, right? It's a little hard.
So that's a formalist position in a way.
You could say it's a formalist position. You could say
definitional, and I don't care about the reality.
Yeah, or you could say it's like I just don't trust them. I don't even trust, even when they look like they're being honest. I just have this blanket suspicion of non-Jews.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. So when it says I feel like kohani, meaning even if he did leave the saddle, and even if he did leave because Leica is no, right? So I'm just trying to.
It doesn't have the factors that would indicate that he is. Meaning it doesn't have the factors that would indicate that he's taking it by force.
Correct.
Meaning it doesn't have that he took the saddle. It doesn't have the factor that that Shimon knows that it belonged to whatever. There's none of those factors that indicate he's taking it by force. Nevertheless, I'm going to assume he's taking it by force. Okay, yeah, Charlie.
Steinsaltz have goy.
Okay, go ahead. What does it say about? Does it say stam goy anas? What's what after goy?
Goy anas.
Yeah, okay. All right, let's take a look at Tosos. One final point about this. Let's take a look at Tosos. Do you know who the mafzi lay? It says Taim el Rashba. I see right bin tarfa v'ashalim lecha. Why doesn't Ruvain just say to Shimon, prove to me that he was prove to me that Marduk took it from you legitimately. And then I'm assuming that Marduk is just taking it from you forcefully. If you can prove to me that he legitimately took it from you, then I'll reimburse you. Okay? So he says, V'yesh lomar, D'mari tikon sheb'dinei akum dan imo, b'dineihem havya da'avya. No, the reason is because it's not a case where it was bedin. It was just bedinei akum. So nobody can sort of fault Marduk. It's when two legal systems come into intersection. Marduk has proven to the satisfaction of the secular court that it's his. So Shimon is saying, reimburse me because I'm considering you to be a thief, right? So I'm considering it to be stolen goods. So, and the halacha actually is that you actually might have to do that, which is very interesting in terms of the question of Dina de Malchusa. When Dina de Malchusa intersects with, right, like Dina Yisrael. Because if you think about it, at the end of the day, putting aside a Meimar, the conclusion of the Gemara is that if we know or there's an indication that Marduk is stealing it, then Ruvain's off the hook. If Marduk wins in secular court, then we're going to, that's what Tosu says, the Rambam says the same thing. If Marduk wins in secular court, Ruvain has to reimburse him, which means that we're recognizing the rulings of secular court right? As opposed to a Maimar says this whole thing is illegitimate. The whole government is illegitimate. They're all shkarim. It's all theft. That's not Ruvain's responsibility. No, we're actually saying if he wins in Dina de Malchusa, that has some weight, and that maybe means that we're concerned that Ruvain did sell him stolen goods, and Ruvain has to reimburse Shimon. Now again, does he have to just work to try to help Shimon? Does he actually have to reimburse? Does he actually have to buy it back? Yes.
So the question here is, don't steal is one of the Noachide prohibitions.
Yeah.
Are non-Jews permitted to define theft?
Yes.
In a different
Yes,
way?
that's part of what dinim is about.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we go on to the next part of the Mishnah. Yeah.
Can you explain again the question of Tosos?
Yeah, the question of Tosos is that if we're going to assume, if we first assume that Marduk did not win it in court, Marduk just took it. Okay, he left behind the saddle, but he just took it. Okay, so there's an indication maybe it's his because he left behind the saddle, but there's no official stamp of approval on what he did. So you, Shimon, you come to me and you say, Marduk took it. He said it was his. I'll say to you, prove to me that he legitimately proved it was his, and then I'll reimburse you. Until you do that, I'm going to say I sold you a donkey that was mine, and Marduk was just taking it. So why do you have a legitimate claim to ask me to help you out if, okay, there's a little indication he might have been telling the truth, at least in his own mind. He thinks he's telling the truth. But I'm claiming he's not. Why should that create an obligation on me? And does what creates the right. And what what creates the obligation is not just that he claims it was his, but that he won in non-Jewish court.
Finds from
Right, exactly.
The secular court.
Right, so that's a pretty powerful statement about Dina de Malchusa having an impact. Right.
You don't have a choice.
Right, but I could still claim it's all very nice.
Oh,
that we don't
I'm
have to
saying it's not that it's legitimate,
Yeah,
but what
it's
are you going to
Yes,
do?
we're in this
The
reality.
constable from the court's going to.
What are you going to do
That's
if
what
they're? What are you going to do if they're using force and there's no way to get it back?
And like, how long would it last? Meaning, like,
It's not just that you're not getting it back. It has to be I'm not getting it back, and it's because I'm assuming that it was stolen and that it's your responsibility now. So it's not just because the court ruled it's final. It's because that still wouldn't create an obligation on me, Reuven. It's only because we think that there's some legitimacy to that that you have a legitimate taina on me.
so it's imagine like Shimon's owned it for 20 years, and then
No, if Shimon's owned 20
there's,
years,
like, a month
that
comes
would be
by.
like the Bas Chamorro case. Then there wouldn't be a responsibility. Oh, you mean Shimon owned 20 years after Reuven? Shimon owned it 20
Yeah,
years.
Shimon owns over 20 years, and like some kind of like mob comes through the town. and
Right,
steals
so
it,
that
and
would
he,
be a
like, goes
clear
back to
case that there
Reuven
wouldn't
and
be a
says-
responsibility. Right.
What is the halacha? I mean, because the fact that the Ein Mishpah was an olive there, is that
Yeah, so that's-
the Ein halacha like
Yeah,
Neymar?
so I mean, thank you for saying that. Okay, and then we really do have to move on. But yes, the Rambam actually rules like a Maimar, and I'll read you the ruling of the Rambam. Now, he doesn't give that reason, okay, but I'll read you that ruling. And that's actually an important point, again, besides the attitude towards non-Jews. It's an important point because of the question about the legitimacy of Dina de Malchusa. Here I was talking about how, the earlier ruling shows the extent of the legitimacy of it. It's all very nice, but what's the psak at the end? The psak at the end might be rejecting that. So if you look at the Rambam, I meant to read this in. It's Yutet Mechira. Hold on. Here's what the Rambam says. He says, okay, so, by the way, David, somebody asked this before, and I answered incorrectly. The question was is there general liability on metaltalin, like I have to insure it, or is there, well, actually, let me take a step back. There's two cases. One is that it's seized by a debt and so on. But in cases like we saw yesterday, when I sell you something and it's taken from you because the proof was that I never owned it, then that's not really so much an issue of achrayus. That's like more of a mekachos issue, right? I never owned it. I sold you something I didn't own. So that would apply to metaltalin. So if this was Dinei Yisrael, and this was Mordechai, and he won it because it proved that I never owned it, not in collection of a debt, and I would have to pay up Shimon. It doesn't matter that it's metaltalin, but because I sold him. So I think that's important to also realize here, right? If this was genuinely won by proving it was never mine, I would have to reimburse Shimon. Right. So now, according to the Gemara, it's not genuinely won. It's won because, or whatever, it's won because of secular rule that it wasn't mine. How much does that create a responsibility, right? So the first opinion is, okay, we'll treat it the same as if Marduk won in court, and now Reuven has a responsibility. But the final ruling of a Maimar is Reuven has no responsibility even then. And that's the way the Rambam rules. He says, but and when is it true that you have to reimburse? כגון שהיה המקח מטלטלין והיו גנובים או גזולים, או שהייתה קרקע גזולה, או שבא בחור שמוכר וטרפה מיד לוקח, in the case of karka, והכל בבייסים של ישראל. So if this was taken in a Jewish court, so then I would have to reimburse him because it was basically a mekach tos, okay? And that's the position that the Gemara initially says would apply even in a non-Jewish court if it was legitimate. But then the Rambam says, very clear, operating within their legal system, right? ואף על פי שהגוי טוען שהמוכר גנב חפץ זה או גזלה ממנו והביא עדי גויים על כך, אין המוכר חייב כלום. שזה אנס הוא, ואין המוכר חייב באחריות אונס. Okay, now that's pretty amazing because the Rambam Paskins, there's a question how broadly the Rambam Paskins the principles of Dinah de Malchusa, right? But here basically saying, he totally explicitly says it's working, operating within secular law, non-Jewish court. He won it fair and square. He brought witnesses, he brought evidence. According to all of that, I never owned this and I should have to reimburse Shimon. I don't have to reimburse him. I think the whole thing is a scam.
I hear the Rambam. I find it astounding that the Rambam would rule against the legitimacy of a Muslim court, have Tosafot in favor of a Christian court.
Well, no, Tosafot was explaining an earlier stage in the Gemara.
Okay.
Rambam is paskening by the last line.
Okay, so what I hear the Rambam's emphasizing, though, is that word anis. In other words,
but it's not honest. He said he won it from him in Bein B'dinei HaMelech, Bein B'Rakot
I know, but I hear him emphasizing that like this was not justice wasn't done even.
How do you know? How can you decide that without looking at the case? Again, I do want to say that there's a number of positions that think that the Rambam's psak of Dinah de Malchusa is very, very narrow. There's a Shitas Gaonim that Dinah de Malchusa refers only to laws that govern the relationship between the government and the private individual. Laws like paying taxes. Okay, the laws that govern the relationship between individuals, civil law, okay, according to some Shitot, is not covered by Dinah de Malchusa. And there's an understanding that based on other psakim of the Rambam, that Rambam might hold of that narrow definition. So this certainly seems to reinforce a very narrow definition of Dinah de Malchusa. Okay, let's now move on. Uman ein lo chazaka. I'm a Rabbi. Okay, so if your dry cleaner says that is wearing your suit, and he says you sold it to me, that's not a chazaka. Okay, even though we normally assume something under somebody's possession is his. Okay, so I'm a Rabbi. Lo shanu lo shemasu lo be'edim. Aval masu lo shalo be'edim. Mitoch sheyachol lomer lo hayad dvar me'olam ki amar nami lekuchi biyadi mehem. Okay, now we have to. It's going to get a little confusing, but hopefully I can make it simpler. Okay, so it's Adim, no Adim. Uha, whatever. Now, there are going to be 4 scenarios, and Rava is going to take one column and Abai is going to take one row. Okay, one row. In terms of which are the cases that you don't have a chazaka. So here are the scenarios, okay? I have Adim that, David will be my dry cleaner. I have Adim that I gave him my suit, okay? And now there are 2 scenarios within that. Nobody sees him wearing my suit. I say, David, where's my suit? He says, what do you mean? I said, you sold it to me. He says, what do you call it? I say, David, give it back to me. I gave it to the dry cleaning. He says, no, I already gave it back to you or whatever. So you sold it to me. I own it, etc. Okay, so in that, am I seeing him wearing it or I'm not seeing him wearing it? What difference does it make? If I'm seeing him wearing it, then the combination of Adim and seeing him wearing it means that's a case that's obviously no chazaka, right? Because A, I know you got it in the context of doing dry cleaning, and I know you're holding on to it now. So obviously we're going to interpret that you had it for dry cleaning purposes, not for owning purposes, and that there's no chazaka.
The Adim saw you give it to him
as dry clean, yes. Okay.
So you brought Adim to the Lord.
Yes. So this is clear no chazaka. Yes. Exactly. There are other people standing around. It's like what's it called? Judge Judy, right? Oh yes, I'm bringing in my 2 witnesses who were there when I dropped off my suit. Okay. Anyway, now the question is,
you watched Judge Judy?
I don't know. I saw 2 minutes of it once. Okay. Anyway. Okay. Quiet, people. Really, come on. Okay. Now the question is, what about these two squares? Okay, well, let's take a look. The case that is most obvious that I have that I should have a chazaka is this case, right? Because nobody saw me give a suit to David, and nobody sees it in his hands. Okay, and I just accost David on the street and I say, David, where's my Armani suit? And he says, you sold it to me. So, okay, no, he could say, I don't know what the heck you're talking about, right? And he'd be believed. Nobody sees him wearing it. Okay, he could say, you gave it to me and I returned it to you. Anything he could say, he would be believed because there's no witnesses I ever gave it to him and nobody's seeing him wear it right now. So this is a place that clearly he's believed to say that it's his. Okay, everybody get that? There's no even evidence that it was ever under his control, and I'm not even seeing it here with him now. The question is, what do you do about these two cases? So what Rav is going to say is, is that the case of no chazaka is this case. All the cases where there are witnesses that I gave it to David, since there are witnesses I gave it to him, even if nobody is seeing him wearing it right now, and he might be able to sort of claim I returned it to you, right? What's the benefit of not seeing him wearing it right now? Because he could claim I returned it to you. Maybe he'd be believed or whatever. Rav is saying, no, he's still, once we know that he got it as to dry clean, even if we're not seeing it right now, he doesn't have a chazaka, okay? Whereas Abaye is going to go the other way. I need a different color. Do I have a different color?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Abaye is going to go the other way. Abaye, and is going to say, okay, that as long as I'm seeing David with my Armani suit, even though nobody knows that I ever gave it to him, he's a dry cleaner. He's got my suit. If we know he's got it, then he's not believed to say that he got it by a purchase. And if he ever wants to buy my suit, he better get a star or some type of witnesses or some type of thing. People know it was my suit, and now they see him wearing it. Okay, so which of these cases are going to be the ones that have no? This we obviously has no chazaka. This he obviously does. How about these two? Okay, so let's take a look here. What? I'm a rabbi. Lo shanu, thank you. Lo shanu elo shemasu lo be'edim. When does he have no chazaka? When there were witnesses. Okay. Aval masu lo shelo be'edim. But if nobody ever saw me gave it to David, he could always say, like, even if he's wearing my suit, he could always say, you never gave me this suit to be cleaned. You sold it to me. And we never know that this, even though what's okay, he's a dry cleaner. He's allowed to wear suits. So if nobody ever saw me give him this suit to be clean, and he'd be believed to say that, then he's believed to say it's his. So as long as you'd be believed here, because nobody ever saw it, because since nobody saw you have this suit for the purpose of dry cleaning, you're believed to say that you got this suit under different conditions. Once we know you got the suit for dry cleaning, you're not believed even if we're not seeing it in your possession right now. Okay, so that's Rabba. Okay, Rabba says it all goes by Eidim. Okay, in this case there is no chazaka, and in this case there is a chazaka. Okay, because in this case, as long as we don't know that you ever got that suit, even if you're a dry cleaner, then you're believed to say that you got it legitimately. Okay, that is Rabba's position. Amalei Abaye said, Yahachi afilu beidim nami. Now Abaye said, so with witnesses, if you go down to this square, so why you should also be believed, according to you, because Abaye assumes if I gave David my suit with witnesses, and then I said, David, give me back my suit, okay, and he says I gave it back to you, is he believed? Is he believed to say, this is why we use tickets, right, to prove who's got the suit and whose suit can we assume has it or whatever. So, but if we don't have tickets that we're going to use, so if I said, David, where's my suit? And he says, I gave it back to you. Abaye is assuming he'd be believed to say that, since we're not seeing him holding on to it. So even if there were 8 of them, if we're not seeing him holding on, if he'd be believed to say he gave it back, he should be believed to say he bought it, because he could just as easily say he gave it back.
Why does he believe that he gave it back, given the fact that it wouldn't be Hamotzim Chavero?
Yeah, but there's a general question. There's a question like Halovas Chaver be'edim, Tzarich Lefar be'edim, Ein Tzarich Lefar be'edim. So yeah, meaning all the witnesses prove is that he originally got it, but they don't prove that he's still holding on to it. So that becomes this question about what type of standard of proof is required to prove, that the other thing was not satisfied. But yeah, Rabba's presumption makes, I think, the most intuitive sense. If I gave it to you with witnesses, you're going to have to demonstrate the proof that you gave it back. But okay, so anyway, let's take Amalei Rabba. So Rabba says, said, "Misavris," because I don't agree with you, Abaye. Misavris amafkidei to chaver beidim eino tzarich lachzir leilu beidim. Who says that David doesn't have to return it to me with witnesses? If I said to David, "Where's my suit?" and he says I gave it back, I think you should be believed. No, I hold that David, even if I say, "Where's my suit?" and he says I gave it back to you, he's not believed, and I can sue him. If I get witnesses at the time, he needs to have witnesses in the return. Okay, so David asks a good question, like, why is that? What's our point of departure here? But this is why there's a debate, because the Gemara understands just because normally Aiden proved that I still owe something. Here they just prove that I at one time owed it, but we assume eventually the loan is going to be paid and the pikadon is going to be given back. So does that create a shift the presumption of proof onto me, or not shift the presumption of proof? But anyway, what Rabbi is saying is, since I told him these cases, David is not believed to say he has it. He gave it back to me. Then he also doesn't have a chazaka. In these cases where we never know that David had it to begin with, he does have a chazaka. That's Rabbi. Okay. Now Meisei Abaye asks on this. Ra avdo biyad uman with talisa biyad biyad. What's that? Koves. Omilo mativo etzacha. You see your slave by your by the blacksmith. He's apprenticing himself by the blacksmith. Or you see your garment at the dry cleaner.
No, the dry cleaner.
And you say, "What's this doing?" What do you mean? You sold me this slave. You sold me this garment. Okay. Lo amar klum. He's not believed. Now that's a case of uman is not koneh, all right, with a chazaka. Okay. Now if he says if you told me in his presence to sell it to him, he is believed. What does that mean? Huh? Told me in whose presence, and why all of a sudden is he believed? If this is an uman who isn't believed, that even when he says he bought it from me directly, why is he believed to say when he bought it from me in somebody's presence? Like, what's going on here? So the Gemara says, no. My generation, my say. What are you talking about here in the end? Amarabba seifa biyotze mitachas yad acher. No. Here's what the end means. It means if I say to the dry cleaner, "What are you doing with my suit?" He says, "You sold it to me." He's not believed. But if I see Jenna with my suit, and I say, "Jenna, what are you doing with my suit?" And she says, and Jenna says, and Jenna says, because you told, when I was at the dry cleaners picking up the dry cleaning, David told me that you had asked him no, not you had asked him, not David told me. I saw you. We don't remember, no, we bumped into each other at the dry cleaning, and you said right there to David, you said, "Yeah, you know what? Give my suit to Jenna." So you're saying that I gave that suit to you. David gave it to you, but you heard me tell David to give it to you. So in that case, even though she's getting it from the dry cleaner, she's believed, because if she wanted to lie, she would just say she got it straight from me. Okay? So if David says, right, okay, fine. So Kirmale Befanei Marta Lulamochro Dvarv Kayami Umehemen. Okay, so that's a case where if I say to David, "What are you doing with that suit?" and he says, "You sold it to me," he's not believed. If I say to Jenna, "What are you doing with that suit?" and she says, "You told David to give it to me, and I heard you tell David," she is believed. Wonderful. Let's get back to the first case.
Yeah, it's amigo.
Right, it's amigo. Exactly. Let's get back to the first case where David is not believed when he says that I sold him the suit. So, Katani Mihas Reisha that I saw David holding on to the suit. Right? That's what it says. You saw your suit in somebody else's hands. That shows that the key issue here is ra'ah. The key factor is not whether there were Adim, but whether it was ra'ah or not. If you saw it, David holding on to my suit, there's no chazaka. Okay? So, Tani Mihas, where were we?
Tani Mihat Reisha.
Tani Mihat Reisha, ra'ah. Hechidami. Idi ika Adim, lamali ra'ah. According to you, Rava, who needs Ra? If there were Adim, you say Adim always means no chazaka. Right. So don't tell me Ra. Tell me whether there were witnesses and how he got it in the first place. Elalav the lega Adim. It must be that there are no witnesses. And the key question is, did you see him holding on to it or not? So you see that the key factor is not whether it was given with witnesses. The key factor is whether it was given, whether you saw it in the hand. So you don't understand?
No, because what does it matter if he thinks he bought it from you? Then of course he has it. What does it matter?
No, because if it was low raw, he could claim if he wanted to lie that he never has it.
or that he never had.
Right.
But I
You
mean,
see, the point about these two things is, if he didn't see it, he could claim he never had it.
Yeah.
And if there were, wait, which was the other one? And here he could claim like, even though you see that he has it now, he could claim he never got it in the context of dry cleaning.
He bought it from you.
Right.
Right. But so then that's based on aiding, not seeing.
Right. But this Breita says that because I saw it in his hands, he's not believed.
Right, but that's what I'm not. That's just where I'm not understanding why. Like, why can't he still say, yeah, of course I have it. I bought it from you.
Because Abaye's contention is that because in general you give your clothes to a dry cleaner, you can never believe it. If a dry cleaner is wearing clothes we knew belong to somebody else, he's just because of his profession, he's never believed what the context is that he has those clothes. Okay. So he'd better get a receipt or a star, right? So, okay, yes, it's true. It's not like starting with evidence that you got it in one context. It's a generic, meaning Abaye makes sense about the Mishnah, because the Mishnah says a dry cleaner doesn't have a chazaka. It's not a case by case. I saw you got this suit in this context. It's generally, since you're generally a dry cleaner, we're going to assume if you have other people's clothes, it's because you got them for dry cleaning, unless you can prove otherwise. Okay? So yes, but thank you. That's why raw matters. Even if we don't know how you got this, because you're a dry cleaner, we're going to assume you got it for the purpose of dry cleaning. So let's just see how Rabbi answers, and we'll end with that right now. So the Gemara says, "Elav like Eidim v'chiram miyatavisle." So you see, the key question is, even without Eidim, if you see the guy holding on to it and he's a dry cleaner, you cannot assume that it's legitimately his. If you don't see him, you can always deny it. You can't assume it's his. So it says, "Lo leolam deika Eidim." There are witnesses. Who dera? So he says, no. Actually, the reason the Breita says ra'ah is because you need both. For David not to have a chazaka, this is really shrinking it. It's only this case, which is the most obvious case. There were witnesses he got it for dry cleaning, and you saw it. That's the obvious case. So that's why you need ra'ah. Only when the two things combine does David not have a chazaka. So Abai says back 1 minute. But you said it's all about Eidim. And if there were Eidim, even if it was low ra, David wouldn't be believed, because he wouldn't be believed to say he gave it back. So it says, Habibi, all right, I take it back. So the evidence of the Breita is, just the last sentence, the evidence of the Breita is that for an Ummah not to have a chazaka, it's necessary that we see him wearing it. Otherwise, he could always claim he doesn't have it all together. Okay, for Abaye, that's all that matters. Ra never has a chazaka, low ra always has a chazaka. Rabbi, who emphasized Eidim, because of this Breita, is forced to concede that Ra matters, and winds up saying that it's only when you have both things coming together are you not going to have
because you don't have the edut of the returning, only of the giving at the beginning.
Well,
so he concedes as a weakness in the edut. You need something else.
Well, yeah, this case of both, right. Anyway, yeah. So, yeah, because he would be believed to say he gave it back.
Exactly.
So you need to have both of them coming together. All right. So that's
You can now fill in the table according to
what?